I'm Noel,
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Cole.
and we're living overseas on a dime.
That's our channel name. So
Thanks.
yeah.
Hi there, welcome to Living Overseas on a Dime. My name's Noel, and today we're going to talk about some of the basic details of how we're exactly planning to do this and how we're planning to be able to live overseas on not a heck of a lot of money from a lot of people's point of view. But just to recap, we've been saving for quite a few years, and our plan is to live on about $2,000 a month, traveling the world and kind of doing a slow travel. Some people call it slow mad, and at the same time trying to work a bit to make some money to make this possible. So first of all, let's talk about this. How is this even possible? Are we completely crazy? That's what a lot of people will say, that we are completely crazy, and you know what? They might be right. But we have lived overseas before, and we like trying different things. So we think it's time. So really, our plan is to only utilize $2,000 a month of our savings / investments, and so that there's kind of like, you got to get to the point where you have that money first. So the first point is savings. So you need to figure out how you're going to have a savings rate. Some people do it through cutting back on some things. They'll cut back on, the expensive coffees. They'll cut back on big trips. They'll, maybe get rid of their vehicle, maybe live in a cheaper place, have cheaper rent. There's lots of different options, and we can go into that at a future date. But so that's one option. You decrease some of your expenses, especially the major ones like cars and rent or mortgage. The second option is to increase how much money you make. And a lot of people will do that through some sort of side gigs, or figuring out a way that they can actually make more money in their primary job, either through taking on a more overtime. I did that a fair bit, trying to figure out maybe to do a side extra job within the regular job. That's another possibility. But it's really two sides to the same thing. Do you decrease your expenses, or do you increase how much money you make? It is difficult if you have a lot of completely unavoidable expenses like multiple children and whatnot. And, there is a level of entitlement and being privileged, being able to do this, because you are in a position where you have to have a job that allows you to save and have less expenses. So I definitely do acknowledge that, and that it's not something that everyone has the capacity to do. That being said, if you are diligent and are in a position to do so, you can look at your finances and figure out a way. Okay, what can I cut out, and how can I make more money? And then it comes up with something that eventually is called the savings rate. Now, that's generally considered a percentage of your monthly income that you can put into investments. We're not going to go into too much detail with investments, but generally a safe, I don't like the word bet, but a safe thing to invest in is some sort of index fund that over the long term will give you a relatively decent rate of return, especially compared to most of the bank accounts and fixed interest investments these days, which I think right now it's not even 1.5% that a lot of investments give you, whereas the stock market over the long term, not the short term, and the long term we're talking over 15 years, more like 20 or 30 years. You have to have a long investing horizon in relation to these things. But over time and patience, you can grow your money somewhere between 4 and 7%. I think a 4% expectation is safer. A lot of people like to go a bit lower than that, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So the next thing you need to do is have a look at your cost of living. If you have a really high cost of living, and by that I mean your actual cost after deducting your work expenses, etc., is in excess of, say, $80,000 a year, you might need to reevaluate, because that's going to require a lot more money to be able to do that. And you probably need to have, I would say, around $2 million in investments before you can even consider doing something like this. However, if your lifestyle is not as big, I know the term that the financial independence retire early people like to use is fat fire. We're more on the side of the frugal fire, and a lot of the things we like to do, yoga, play music, just water activities, are things that we don't really need that much money up front to do. So when you have a lifestyle that, for us, for example, we don't spend much more than $40,000 a year here in Canada, and that includes our mortgage and our car, which is paid off. But you need to really have a good, honest look at your expenses. Now, that means you need to probably track what you spend for a couple months. There may be kind of exceptional one-off expenses in there, but that's okay. You can kind of either remove those, or you can include those, because those do exist in your life when you're not necessarily in your location that you're at right now too, right? So you need to look at your lifestyle, and then you need to say, okay, how much do I need? How much do I need to maintain a lifestyle like this? Okay, so let's say it's $40,000. A lot of people would consider that on the low end, but it's interesting when you remove something like a vehicle, when you remove something like your mortgage payment or an expensive rent in a city like San Francisco, New York, Vancouver, Toronto, all of a sudden your cost of living will likely go down. And that brings us to an important part of our entire plan, which is location. Now, some people will call this geographical or geographic arbitrage. Arbitrage being the ability to kind of leverage how much money you have to give you an advantage in relation to that thing. So in this case, it's your location. So for example, let's say it costs you $1,500 to rent a one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver. That's probably not enough, but let's say it costs that for a nice one-bedroom apartment in a suburb of Vancouver, Canada, $1,500. Okay, so now we look at the same type of apartment in Bangkok, Thailand. Well, it's likely going to cost half that, if not less, say $500 to $700 a month, and you could probably get for significantly cheaper. So that does take some diligence and some investigation and research to try and figure out, okay, where do I want to live? Where do I not want to live? What sort of things am I comfortable dealing with? But when you open up the world, and in this time with COVID, it's a little bit more complicated. You need to figure out what you're comfortable with and where you're comfortable living. And there are a lot of locations that allow you more freedom and a greater lifestyle for much lower cost, just dependent on where you're willing to live. A lot of people in Canada and the US like Mexico. Mexico does have a much lower cost of living. There's no question. However, as we have been going to the Puerto Vallarta area for the last 3-4 years or so, prices are rising. People are moving there more, and it's something you need to be aware of. You can still get cheap places to live there, and by that I mean, between $600 and $800 a month for a 1 to 2 bedroom. But even that, it's not going to be on the beach. It's not going to be a super fancy place. You're going to have to be willing to live more local style. If you want to live more with, the beautiful open concept with the nice kitchens and not very Mexican style, it's going to cost over $1,000 a month, likely. You may get lucky. You may find a nice place for less than that, but it's hard to find, and you're going to have to be diligent and or know someone there who can help you set that up. Southeast Asia, there's lots of locations that you can live for quite cheap. and a lot of rents will be between the $400 and $700 a month range, Canadian dollars, quite a bit less for US dollars, probably less than $500 US a month, depending on where you want to live. If you want to live in a very fancy condo style in Bangkok, it can cost as much as you want it to cost. But if you're willing to live a little bit, not as fancy, maybe a smaller lifestyle, you're going to be eating out a lot. There's fantastic food in Southeast Asia, so a kitchen isn't as important. You're not going to have an oven. They basically don't exist in most of Asia. You may find one, but are you baking cakes? Maybe. If you're a baker, well, then you're going to have to figure out how to incorporate an oven into your cost of living. How often are you planning on moving? Are you going to be moving every 3 months or so? Well, right now, that's difficult. So you need to incorporate these sort of issues into your location. Europe's another possibility. There are a lot of very nice places in kind of Southeast Europe, the Balkans, getting up into like Ukraine, Poland. A lot of these places, if you're not in, the center of the city, once again, it can be, $500 US a month or so for rent, as long as you're willing to do a full month rent. If you're trying to just do day to day, you're going to likely have to pay more. But you need to be selective. I know on Airbnb, when we look at the 1 month cost, there's often significant discounts of even sometimes up to 80% if you're willing to book a whole month in advance. There are some risks to that. Occasionally the landlords can cancel on you, so you need to be somewhat flexible and willing to accept those risks when you're booking generally pretty far in advance, and wanting to book a month at a time. There's also South America. A lot of countries in South America do have similar types of rent, around $500 US a month. But that does also come with other sorts of risks. There's occasionally political upheaval in some of those countries. So you really need to be on the ball with following what exactly is going on in these places and what you're looking for. Some people may not be interested in the food in South America, or they may find the food in Thailand way too spicy, not like curries. There's so many things. You need to just look at the whole package and ultimately just go try it out. You have to consider all the different aspects of the location that you're considering. That includes weather, food. I kind of think of it as like a whole package, basically. And, you can't just look at one thing. If the weather's not your thing, well, you have to be careful because you need to look at all the different components. And sometimes maybe the weather, for example, might just be cool for a little part of the year, and you could go somewhere else. So you need to kind of look at everything. So really, for the whole plan, first you got to do your saving. Put your saving together, get your investments together, figure out your budget. It's kind of the most important part. Be aware of what you spend and what you want to do with your money. Find the location, make an estimate as to what you want to spend. Then go and try it out. Go check out that location. Ultimately it's kind of an experiment. Is this place going to work for me? Is it what I thought it was going to be? Often there'll be parts that aren't. And then there'll be some parts that maybe will blow away your expectations. Who knows? It's kind of the adventure of life, and it's trying to figure out exactly what you want to do with these different locations. Now, ultimately, make sure you have some sort of backup, because a place you go to might have an expense you didn't expect at all. And that can be either through some sort of separate savings account that you have, or through some sort of online way to make money through perhaps being a digital nomad or whatever you want to do with that. But you definitely need to have some sort of backup. And none of this has discussed the elephant in the room, so to speak, of COVID. And it's not really something we're going to go into right now, but definitely right now traveling is more complex, and there's a lot more requirements that you may or may not need in the near future for getting into a country, or even leaving a country for that matter. So we'll discuss that later on, especially considering we're not going to be doing this for another 6 months or so. And our first location, we'll talk about that as we get closer. But for now, I hope this was a good introduction to our plan here and what we're thinking about doing. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a good day. Everyone, take care and happy travels.